Welcome to Buzz and Bark Animals. My name is Patricia, and usually I do Reiki videos, but they're not doing all that well. And I noticed that the channeling session with Aloka did really well. Well, I mean, for this channel. For other channels, that would be dismal. So if you like this, please share, comment, and subscribe. And I am going to be channeling Jane Goodall. Now, I have already channeled her twice. I channeled her for my previous Buzz and Bark Animals, and I also channeled her for my channeling platform on Vimeo called the Lyra Star Messenger, and I also wrote an article on her for Substack around, I think it was last fall. So last fall is when I did all the channeling around the time that she died. And my question for her is animal advocacy. She was an animal advocate, and I also think she was a good animal communicator, although she never used that title herself. And I want to know how we can move forward with mindfulness, because a lot of animal advocacy, unfortunately, does not have mindfulness. It is very passionate for good reason. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of hostility in some cases, where it kind of defeats the purpose. So if you're trying to save one creature, why would you try to punish another one? Because if you want to wake people up, you don't do it by yelling at them. And, and then there's a lot of shaming and blaming and judging and a lot of these things that are not helping animals, and they're not helping the planet, because it just spreads negativity and sort of toxic energy, which in the end ends up hurting the animals more than helping them. So I want to ask her about this. There are Buddhists who have sanctuaries for animals and also shelters. And there are also more attention on rescue animals now, with the Walk for Peace and all the rest of that, and the monks having the dogs, the rescue dogs, and they're not the only ones. I'm sure there's monks all over the world who have rescued animals, and you could find plenty of videos on that. And it isn't just Buddhists that have, done a lot for animals. There's also Franciscans, in the honor of St. Francis, have also helped animals, and usually they're a foundation, and they raise money to help animals in need, and sometimes people in need who have animals that need attention, but the people don't have the money to pay for that. So so there are at least those two religious traditions. And then in India, I know with Hinduism, or in some of the different religions in India, there used to be more vegetarianism. I noticed there isn't so much of it now. It seems to have dwindled in percentage wise. So I'm going to ask her where we are now and how we can become more mindful, how we can become more awakened as humans, and what do animals want from humans? Are we meddling too much with them and in the ecosystem? Should we just back off, or do they need our help, and how do they need our help? So those are the questions that I'm presenting to her. And I have my picture Jasper and my singing bowl. So I'm going to do the singing bowl. Okay, she's saying that religion is sort of shifting gears. It's changing its focus, and she's not talking any particular religion. We're in a survival crisis on the planet. There is a sense of lack of resources, especially, and there is a battle, an obvious battle that most people can see, of where these resources are going to go and who's going to take them. There is an unequal balance of wealth and resources on the planet. There is slave culture, not just for animals, but for humans as well. And she's saying that we can't really blame and shame humans to the extent that we have, because they are just as much in trouble as animals are. And she's saying that with the cost of, say, animal medicine right now, because that is turned into incredible greed and corruption. Yeah, not so much with your independent vets, but definitely with the chain ones and some different things that are happening. People can't afford to pay for medicine for their animals, and they're having to make some really difficult decisions. And everything's put on them. So people are saying, oh, these pet owners are not being responsible, you know. And then you've got the people with more money, and they're spoiling their animals, and they're actually suffocating their animals because they're giving their animals what they don't need and not giving their animals what they need. So she says, yes, mindfulness and consciousness with humans, it doesn't matter what religion someone is or says they're part of. That doesn't matter. What matters is becoming more conscientious and becoming more conscious and slowing down. So if we really, she says, if we want to have a relationship with animals, we cannot be all sped up. We need to listen better. We need to observe. We need to witness, and we need to show more compassion. And she's saying that compassion isn't just for them, it's for us and where we're at and that we're evolving. And she says humility and integrity and responsibility are what it's going to take for us to turn things around. Now, is she saying that we've manipulated the environment in some ways? Yes, we have. When you take animals into captivity and you breed them in captivity, you are manipulating the gene pool. When humans are desperately poor, they will poach and they will do all kinds of things that are detrimental to animal populations, and they're not thinking long term. They're not looking ahead. They're thinking of this moment. I need money right now. And so it's very short-sighted, and so they're not caring like what's going to happen when all the elephants go extinct, or what's going to happen when there's no more animals to hunt for fur or whatever it is. And so as humans, we need to consume less, and we need to consume wisely, and we need to say no to certain products that are made from these animals that, get their material from the poachers. Now, the poachers are puppets. They are only doing what a desperate person's going to do. They're not hateful. They're not evil. They are part of a corrupt chain. And it's not even that they don't love and respect the animal. They're dead inside. So by the time somebody becomes a poacher, their soul is dead. Or they're not their soul, their inner whatever is dead. They're numb. And she's showing me people that work in the slaughterhouses, people who, have to cause some sort of damage along the line in order to satisfy consumption. And so there's the middleman. And she says a lot of the ones who suffer the most are the poorest. And so the inequity of wealth on the planet is affecting everything. It's a rippling effect. It resonates with everything, including the wild animals, but also people's pets. Because if you have to buy the cheapest food for your animal, and that cheap food is going to make your animal sick and lose like 5 years of its life, that doesn't make the person feeding that animal that food bad. They're forced with, how am I going to take care of myself? Sometimes they're families that have children and pets. Sometimes they don't know if they're going to keep a roof over their head. Sometimes the job market's unstable, and a job that they took 10 years ago looks stable for 30 years, and now they're finding out it's being downsized. So there's a lot of things happening on the human level. There's a lot of things happening on the animal level. And she says, yes, being more mindful is going to help us calm down. So our nervous systems as a collective are revved up. We are driving too fast. We're living too fast. We're trying to cram many things into a day. We're not in our minds. We're not in our hearts, she's saying. And we don't have time to feel. We don't have time to check in with our emotions. We don't have time to even know where we're at or who we are or what our name is. Because she's saying that humans are suffering and animals are suffering and the planet is suffering. And there are those who benefit from that. And until she's saying we have to stop believing the lies that they're telling us. The lies are things like convenience, or cheap goods, because even if you're low on funds, you don't need to buy cheap goods. You need to decide what you really need and figure out how to get it, whether you're trading with someone else or getting something for free, or maybe buying something that's higher quality that's going to last a few years, and then thinking of it as an investment. And with animals, she's saying less is more. Like, how many toys does a dog or a cat need? And how many beds do they need? They need a good diet. She said the diet is more important than all of these accessories that people buy for their pets. Like, how many jackets does a dog need? How many harnesses? And also, she's saying when you take the animal to the vet, find out like what procedures do they actually need? Which ones are crucial for their well-being and which ones are just going to take away from their life, their lifespan. And to become very wise in that regard. And she's saying when we slow down, we'll find that we have more time to do things. And slowing down doesn't mean looking for things that are convenient. It means paying attention to whatever you're doing in that moment and not to rush through it or try to cram a bunch of different activities into like one moment. And she's saying that she understands it's hard for people with children, and it's hard for people who are a caregiver or all these other positions people find themselves in. She says, but it is possible. And, and she's someone to say this because she, toward the end of her life, she could have lived another 5, maybe 10 years, but she didn't because she tired herself out. She had this complex that she had to save the world. And, and how many chimps can I save? How many of this lions can I save? How many elephants can I save? She wore herself thin because she didn't have trust in other humans, in the sense that she didn't trust that we were going to wake up. I mean, she did to an extent, but then when she really looked into her belief systems when she was dying, she realized that the thing that she lacked was trust. That there are other people out there that are also doing similar work, that there's, other ones that are being born now or who are growing up or whatever, that she wasn't going to carry this alone, but there was a part of her that kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and she had doctors and relatives and friends tell her, you need to slow down. And she's like, but I have to help with this, and I got to help with the climate change, and I got to do this, and I got to do that. And she kept going. And you can see in the later videos, like, how tired she is. Like, her throat's raw and her, she doesn't have, you can be older and have vitality. And she normally would have had vitality. But she said that she ran her batteries down. And she regrets that. But now, that she can see what's going on in a bigger picture and witnessing what other people are doing, she realizes that there's a lot of good happening right now. And there are a lot of mindful animal advocates. It's not like I think where it's people just yelling at each other. And she says there's a lot of young people who are coming at it from a place of innocence. And that place of innocence is actually very healing because it helps us to slow down. And she said that if we were to be honest and look at, write down every day, all our activities each day, how many of those activities do we really even need to do? She's showing me people scrolling, endlessly scrolling on social media, which is a waste of time. You're not going to get anything out of that, as we're all learning now. And then she's showing people that are gardening, and she's showing me how time stretches. So you got the person gardening on an afternoon, and they're out there for 4 hours and they're gardening, and it feels like they don't realize, or they've been out there all day, but it just stretched out. And then they watched the sunset, and they were able to get a lot of things done in the course of that day because they slowed their rhythms down, their internal rhythms down. And then she's showing me the people scrolling and getting in their car and driving everywhere and doing this and doing that and going to the shopping mall and like, oh, I got to get all these things done and I got to go pick up the kids from soccer and I got to do this and I got to do that. And it gets really frenzied, and then the time just shrinks. So she's showing me a clock, and it's like half of a clock. And she's saying, then she shows me the people who are slowing down through yoga, through breath work, through meditation, through all these different things. And they're maybe only meditating 5-15 minutes a day, but they're slowing down. So she's showing me the clock, and now it's 3/4. It shows 3/4 of the clock, and there's only maybe like just a quarter missing. And she's saying that if you want to slow time down, you have to slow down, because time doesn't actually exist. It's our perception of it. So if we're telling ourselves, I don't have enough time, and we're rushing around and we're having to redo things because we're doing things too fast and we're making mistakes and we're having to go back and we're having to fix things and we're having to call back because we gave the wrong information. She says if we had slowed down, we would have saved ourselves all of that headache. And so she's saying that's how we become more mindful. We have to slow down. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is we need to listen. We need to listen with our eyes and listen with our ears and listen with every part of our being, including listening to our intuition and our physicality. And she says that when we develop those skills, we will calm our nervous systems, and then animals will approach us and they'll be calm. Because she says that when humans are frenzied, animals are frenzied. And it's making them seriously ill. So a lot of the illnesses that domestic animals have now, they did not have 20, 30 years ago. And it's not just because we're spraying poison in the environment, although that plays a role too. It's because of our nervous systems. And she says that's what we need to focus on in the advocacy. That, people also who are animal advocates have to realize they're not doing it alone. They can take some time off. The world's not going to burn up just because they take a week off. And to learn to trust that there's others there, that they don't have to do it on themselves and they don't have to carry that burden. And also to learn mindfulness if they don't really have that skill, and to teach it to their workers and their volunteers and, in the shelters, in all the sanctuaries and all the different places. And she says, yes, Buddhism and Christianity are going to play bigger roles going forward with animals, and also Hindus and Sikhs, because there's going to be more animal rescue. Now, part of this has already been happening behind the scenes, and a lot of people don't, they're not going to advertise what they're doing. They're not going to have YouTube channels. They're not going to, they're working. They don't have time to do that. They don't have the money to hire somebody to do that for them. Now, she's saying the Walk for Peace monks were very lucky. They had a great social media team, and still do. And they just happened to have a very charismatic dog, Aloka, which really brought in a lot of people to mindfulness. They may not become Buddhist, or, they may not be interested in that, and that's fine, she's saying. But they may take that back to an animal advocacy. They may take that back to an animal sanctuary. They may give money to these animal sanctuaries that are done through mindfulness. And they may, if they're healers like Reiki or other, cranial sacral acupuncture or whatever, they may go and volunteer at the shelters and give treatments to the animals. They might host events such as Reiki circles, or, they have like yoga and goats and yoga and dogs and yoga and cats, and and all these different things where they could actually do that to raise money for these sanctuaries in these different places. And she's saying we're also going to be moving away from shelters and moving towards sanctuaries, because sanctuaries give animals more freedom. They can roam, they get more personal care, and if they don't have like the days racing where if you're not adopted in 7 days you'll get euthanized, the sanctuaries will keep animals for a lifetime. And there'll also be new ways of, instead of spaying and neutering, there will be other things that will be done so that animals don't keep, overbreeding. But it won't be as harsh as, a lot of the things that are being done now, because it turns out that, this is my own thing, is I had written an article on dogs that if they're neuter or spayed too early, they end up getting cancer. And there were certain breeds that cannot be spayed or neutered at all. So, and those are some studies that are out there, and, maybe science proves that that's wrong, but right now there's leaning in that direction. And so it's like, well, then how do we curb the overpopulation of animals? Because if we have an overpopulation of animals, it's not good for them, right? If they end up having to be euthanized and put in these shelters in these horrible situations. So, especially when you've got like feral cats taking over a community, and they're killing the birds, and and some of the cats are young enough that they can be adopted out, and and socialized and all the rest of that. But what about the older cats? Like, what happens to them if they've been out there for 5 years or longer? And so, she's saying we're going to come up with solutions, and it's not one person coming up with all the solutions. There's going to be a myriad of people, a myriad of religions, a myriad of spiritual practices, a myriad of young people who had no purpose in their lives finally find a purpose. And the animals have a way of reaching us, just like Aloka did through social media. There'll be other animals as well. There'll be cats and dogs and horses and different animals that are going to open our hearts. And then when they open our hearts, she's showing me Venezuela, because I had some of those dogs rescuing people in Venezuela videos come up, mostly in Spanish. I know very little Spanish. So those stories, hero stories, animals rescuing humans, things like that. And then if we see animals rescuing humans, then we can forgive ourselves as humans and realize that the animals don't hate us. They don't. There's a lot of people who are animal activists, which is kind of a different thing than animal advocates tend to be more low key, whereas the activists are the ones that tend to be more angry, and and I get it, but she's also saying a lot of that's their own trauma. It's their own trauma being mirrored back through an animal that's being abused, because those people have been abused and they haven't healed their own abuse. And so they get triggered when they see that, and they don't realize they're being triggered. And she said she met so many people like that, in all different nations, where she would have to just kind of like calm people down because they would get so upset about something. And she says, well, of course, we would get upset seeing that. But she says, look at the real reason for that anger and that outrage, because it's not going to serve anything. To be angry and to yell at somebody and to call names and all the rest of that is not going to solve the problem. And so she says a lot of the times we got to look within our own hearts and look within our own childhood and look within our own life. Do we have PTSD? Are we suffering from anxiety? Do we feel abandoned? Do we feel like we're being punished in some way or enslaved or whatever it is, and find out what's going on with that? And she says that when we do that, we have to heal. She says, human, heal thyself first. And then once the human is healed, they'll be able to help the animals better. Now, the animals are also coming on as therapists. So we've got horse therapy, cats are coming on as therapists, dogs, reptiles. A lot of these animals are coming on as therapists for humans, because they understand that, in order for humans to be better stewards of the earth, they have to heal themselves. And so the animals have their, in the Buddhist tradition, we would call them bodhisattvas, although a bodhisattva would usually be a human coming back, but she's stretching it a little bit further and saying, well, what if the animals are coming back? In the Western way, we would say earth angels. Why can't they come back like that? What if they had been a human in their previous lifetime and they've decided they don't want to be a human again because they'll be better helped by being a dog or a cat or a horse? Now, sadly, in the Buddhist tradition, the animals are considered lower. So if you were to come back as an animal, it's because something karmically, right? And you don't get to come back as a human, because coming back as a human is seeing being a privilege. But she says, what if that's not true? What if, that the human could have become enlightened, but decided to be a bodhisattva and come back as an animal, because they knew that that animal was going to be able to help children in trouble, because especially children with autism, like low function and autism, they function well around dogs and cats, and horses have been very helpful for them. So who's to say that a soul who is going to become enlightened doesn't decide to be an animal, because they can be a bigger healer and a bigger force on the planet? And she's saying that with the peace dog Aloka was a human before, many times, and he consciously chose to come back as a dog and to work it through that, because he knew he was going to reach a greater number of people being a cute dog rather than being a monk, right? And it's not that the monks aren't doing good work. Of course they are, and and they the good teachers and all the rest of that. He's saying, but who's going to reach the mass majority of people on the planet? Is it going to be a dog, or is it going to be a monk? Now, the monk is going to reach people, she's saying, but not in the same way that a dog is. A dog is going to crack open your heart. And you got a lot of people with very hard hearts right now. And they're not interested in religion. They're not interested in Buddhism. They're not interested in any kind of spiritual practice, but they need to have their hearts open. So how's that going to happen? It's going to happen through a cat, a dog, a horse, or some other kind of animal. And she's saying, so these humans that could have been enlightened decided to come back as animals, and their lives will be brief, and then they'll go back in, and if they want to come back as a human, then they will. Or they may just decide that, they'll come back as a human for a short time, get enlightened, and not come back. And she's saying that's not really her expertise. She was not a Buddhist. So she knew a lot of Buddhists, though. And so that's what she's going to say on those topics that I had asked her, and if there's anything she would like to say before I close this. Yeah, just be patient and slow down, two most important things, and to become more tolerant and understand that, and I've heard this before, you hear this in therapy, people are where they're at. And if they're acting in a very disturbing way, there's a good chance that it's because they're suffering very deep inside, and you don't really know their personal life. You don't really know why they're acting that way. And it does test the patience. It is very painful to watch and to experience, especially if you feel like you're being attacked by them. However, she's saying to step back and don't fight them, because if you're fighting them, you're just putting, she's saying, it's that saying, putting gasoline on the fire. It doesn't put the fire out. And she says the only thing that's going to put out the fire is water, right? And the water would be the compassion. And you don't have to engage with them. You don't have to be part of their whatever, but you can't hate them, because as soon as you hate them, the gig is over. And no one wins. No one wins. And then the person who is hating is opening up a space within their own energy field. This is more for me than her, where really dark entities can come in, and they're parasitic, and they look for those opportunities of intolerance and hatred and poverty consciousness, fear, doubt, and they feed off of it. So they're parasitic, and they feed off of energies. They feed off of emotions. And so if we, if humanity wants to awaken, then they have to stop hating and then projecting that onto someone else. And even if people are doing really horrible things on the planet, and she said they are, you don't want to feed that. And she says the way you don't feed that is you deal with your own anger. You deal with your own emotions. You go and heal that hurt part of yourself. And the more you can do that, the less power they have. And then if more people do that, they'll have no power. And then they'll be forced, they'll either die and go into spirit, or they'll be forced in the physical body to deal with their own wounds. But as long as we keep playing into that and we keep plugging into them, we're giving them fuel. And the more fuel they have, the more damage they're going to cause to the planet. So she says the biggest thing we can do to become mindful is to watch our own emotions and our own feelings and figure out where those are coming from, where those are really coming from, and to heal and to release those. And she's saying that for herself, she wished she had done more of that while she was here. Okay, so that is the end of the session. And I am thanking Jane Goodall. And I am blown away, as usual. And if you would rather me bring back the Reiki and the sound healing, let me know. Since nobody leaves any comments, or very few comments, I don't really know what people want. So let me know if you want more channeling. Do you want card readings? You know, what do you, I mean, the card readings, the totem animal readings. What do you want? Do you want more on animal communication, more on Reiki? Let me know, because I could do all of these things, but I'm not going to do all of it. Right. So just let me know what you want in the comments, and also because people will watch the video and there'll be like 0 likes, and I'm not doing this for likes, but it's disappointing because I still have a human ego. So thank you. Have a wonderful week with you and your pet bonding. Bye for now.